She came with nothing but a suitcase and a prayer. She agreed to marry a man she had never met, in a town she had never heard of, just to escape a life that had already broken her in too many places to count. She did not expect kindness. She did not expect safety. She certainly did not expect him. But sometimes the place you run to becomes the place you were always meant to be. If you have ever felt like you did not belong anywhere, like every door in your life had been quietly shut before you even had a chance to knock, then this story is going to sit with you for a long time. Stay with me until the end, because this one does not just end with love. It ends with something even deeper than that. It ends with home. And before we go any further, if stories like this one make you feel something real, something warm and true, please take just a second to subscribe. We put out new Western romance stories every week, written for anyone who believes that quiet love is the most powerful kind. Now let us begin. Her name was Nora Calloway, and she had learned very early in life that the world did not go out of its way to be gentle with women like her. She was 31 years old, with tired eyes that had seen too much disappointment and hands that had worked too hard for too little. She had grown up in a boarding house in St. Louis, the daughter of a seamstress who died of fever when Nora was 14. After that, she had been passed from one distant relative to another, never quite wanted, never quite enough, always made to feel like a burden that nobody had asked to carry. She had tried to build something for herself. She had worked in a laundry, then a bakery, then as a housekeeper for a wealthy family on the east side of town. She had been careful with her wages, careful with her words, careful with her heart. She had told herself that if she was just good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, someone would eventually want to keep her. Then the family she worked for lost their money in a bad investment, and she lost her position, her room, and her meals all in the same afternoon. She was given 2 days to leave. She was sitting on the edge of a narrow bed with everything she owned packed into one worn suitcase when her friend Clara slid a folded newspaper across the mattress. "Read the back page," Clara said softly. Third column. The advertisement was small and plainly worded. A rancher in a town called Tallow Creek, Wyoming, was seeking a wife. He had a young son, age 4. He needed someone steady and willing. He was not looking for romance. He was looking for a partner. Interested women were to write to a post office box, and if suitable, they would receive a train ticket. Nora read it 3 times. She was not naive. She knew what mail-order arrangements looked like from the outside. She knew the whispers, the raised eyebrows, the pity. But she also knew what her options were, and they were very few. She had no family to go back to, no savings left after her last month of rent, and no other door standing open. She wrote the letter that same night. She was honest in it. She said she was not beautiful or exceptional. She said she knew how to work hard, how to keep a house, how to be patient with children. She said she was not afraid of the West or the cold or long silences. She said she was tired of not belonging anywhere, and that if he gave her a fair chance, she would give him everything she had. 3 weeks later, a train ticket arrived in the mail. There was no personal letter with it, just the ticket and a short note that said, "Arrive Thursday. Someone will meet you. Someone. Not me, not your future husband, just someone." She told herself it did not matter. She got on the train anyway. The ride to Tallow Creek took 2 days. Nora sat with her suitcase on her lap for most of it, watching the land change outside the window from crowded gray cities to wide-open stretches of grass and sky that seemed to go on forever. It should have frightened her, all that emptiness. But instead, it felt like breathing room, like the world was finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The town of Tallow Creek was small and straight-edged, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed the moment they stepped off the train. Nora stepped down onto the wooden platform and stood very still for a moment, looking around, suitcase in hand, heart beating too loud. There was a man leaning against a fence post about 20 feet away. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat and a hat pulled low. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the ground. When the crowd from the train thinned out and she was the only one left standing on the platform, he pushed off the fence post and walked toward her slowly, like a man who had nowhere urgent to be and no particular joy about where he was going. He stopped a few feet away and took off his hat. "Miss Calloway," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. "I'm Elias Croft." He was not what she had imagined, though she realized then that she had not let herself imagine much. He looked to be somewhere in his mid-30s, with dark hair and a jaw that seemed permanently set, like a man who had gotten into the habit of holding things in and had forgotten how to let them out. He was not unkind-looking, but he was not warm either. He was just present, solid and unreadable, like the land she had watched through the train window. "My wagon's out front," he said. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch." That was almost everything he said for the next hour. Nora had grown up around silence. She knew the difference between the silence of someone who had nothing to say and the silence of someone who had too much locked inside them to know where to begin. Elias Croft had the second kind. She could feel it coming off him like heat from a banked fire. The ranch was called Croft's Hollow, and when they came over the last hill and she saw it spread out below her in the late afternoon light, something shifted quietly inside her chest. It was not grand. It was a farmhouse with a wide porch, a red barn, a few outbuildings, and fencing that stretched across the valley in long, even lines. There were mountains in the distance, soft and blue at that hour, and the sky above them was the color of a bruised peach. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She did not say so. They pulled up to the house, and before Elias had even set the brake on the wagon, the front door burst open, and a small boy came running down the porch steps with his arms already out, not toward Nora, but toward the dog that had appeared from behind the barn. The boy crashed into the dog in a hug and laughed, and it was the clearest, most uncomplicated sound Nora had heard in years. Then the boy looked up and saw her, and he went completely still. He was small, 4 years old as the advertisement had said, with dark hair like his father, and very serious brown eyes that were studying her the way children study things they are not sure about yet. "This is my son Daniel," Elias said, climbing down from the wagon. His voice was different when he said the boy's name. Not warmer exactly, but more careful. Like the word was fragile. Nora climbed down on her own and crouched to be at Daniel's eye level. "Hello, Daniel," she said. "My name is Nora." The boy stared at her for a long moment. "Are you going to stay?" he asked. The question landed somewhere deep. "I hope so," she said honestly. Daniel looked at her for another beat, then turned around and went back inside without another word. Elias watched him go with an expression Nora could not fully read, something between relief and guilt and exhaustion all folded together. "He doesn't warm up fast," Elias said quietly. "That's all right," Nora said. "Neither do I." The first week was careful and quiet. Nora found her place in the house the way water finds its level, slowly, without force. She learned where things were kept, what Daniel liked to eat, how the mornings ran. Elias was up before dawn every day, out to the barn and the fields, and he came in for meals and said little beyond what was needed. He was polite, he was not unkind. But there was a wall around him so old and so firmly built that she suspected even he had forgotten when he had started building it. She learned from the woman in town, a stout and cheerful widow named Bess who ran the general store, that Elias had been married before. His wife, Sarah, had died 3 years ago of childbed fever after losing a second baby they had hoped for. She had been beloved in the town. Everyone still spoke of her with softness, and Elias, from what Bess said carefully and without cruelty, had never been quite the same after. "He's a good man," Bess told Nora, wrapping up a length of calico. "He just stopped letting people see it." Nora thought about that on the walk back to the ranch. She thought about how grief could do that, how it could wall a person in so completely that they forgot there was supposed to be a world on the other side. She did not push. She did not try to make herself indispensable or charming or useful in obvious ways. She just did what was needed, quietly, and she made room for Daniel. And Daniel, slowly, began to come closer. It started small. He started appearing in the kitchen when she cooked, not asking for anything, just standing nearby, watching with those solemn brown eyes. Then one afternoon she found him at the table with a piece of charcoal and some brown paper, drawing something she could not quite make out. "What is it?" she asked gently, settling into the chair across from him. "A horse," he said seriously. "But the legs aren't right." She looked at the drawing. The legs were, in fact, quite determined if not entirely anatomically accurate. "I think it has character," she said. He looked up at her for a moment, and then one corner of his mouth turned up. Just slightly, just for a second. But it was something. What she did not know in those first quiet weeks was that Elias was watching all of it. He was a man who noticed things and said nothing. He noticed how she always made sure Daniel's bowl was full before her own. He noticed how she fixed the latch on the chicken coop without being asked, how she read aloud to herself in the evenings by the lamp, how she never complained, not once, not about the hard work or the cold mornings or the fact that he was about as easy to talk to as a fence post. He noticed, and he felt something he did not have a name for yet shift somewhere inside him. Something he had believed was gone. 3 weeks after her arrival, he came in from the barn later than usual, and Nora had kept supper warm without comment. Daniel was already asleep. They sat at the table together in the quiet kitchen, and somewhere between the biscuits and the second cup of coffee, Elias said, without looking at her, "You didn't have to stay." She looked at him. "I wanted to." He was quiet for a moment. "Most women, after the first week, would have asked to go back," he said. "I'm not most women," she said simply, "and I don't have anywhere to go back to." He looked up at her then, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she arrived. And Nora looked back, not with desperation, not with the careful performance of someone trying to be chosen, just steadily, just herself. "Why did you put the advertisement in the paper?" she asked. If you don't mind me asking? Elias set down his cup. Daniel kept asking about his mother, he said slowly. And I didn't know what to tell him anymore. I couldn't fix that. But I thought maybe I could give him something. He paused. Someone. Nora felt the weight of that fall gently around her. And what about you? She asked softly. He did not answer right away. Then he said, so quietly she almost missed it. I thought maybe I could try again, at some kind of life. That was the night the wall around him cracked for the first time. Not fell, just cracked, just enough to let a little light through. 3 weeks after that, disaster found them. It came in the middle of the night as a smell of smoke. Nora was the one who woke first. She had always been a light sleeper, trained by years of boarding houses and uncertainty, and the smell reached her before her mind had fully caught up. She was up and in the hallway before she was even fully awake, and when she pushed open Daniel's door, she could already see the orange glow in the sky through his window. The barn was on fire. She grabbed Daniel and ran. Elias was already outside by the time she got there, and the look on his face when he turned and saw her coming out of the house with Daniel, held tight against her chest, his small arms around her neck, and his face pressed into her shoulder. That look was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. It was relief so complete it was almost painful to see. They lost part of the barn. 3 horses made it out. 1 did not. Elias fought the fire until there was nothing left to fight. And when it was finally out, and the smoke was settling gray and heavy into the cold night air, he sat down on the ground right where he was, exhausted and hollow-looking and dark with soot. Nora settled Daniel against the fence with a blanket around his shoulders and a cup of water, and then she walked over and sat down on the ground beside Elias. She did not say anything. She just sat there, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. After a long time, he said, "The east stall is gone. Half the feed. We'll rebuild it," she said. He turned and looked at her. "We," he said, like the word was new, like he was testing the sound of it. "We," she repeated. Daniel's voice came from behind them, small and clear in the smoky darkness. "Is the dog okay?" And somehow, impossibly, both of them almost smiled. The days after the fire were the kind of days that either break people apart or draw them together with a force stronger than either of them expected. For Elias and Nora, it was the second thing. They worked side by side from before sunrise to after dark. Neighbors came to help, the kind of help that exists only in small towns, quiet and present and asking nothing in return. Bess sent food. 2 brothers from the neighboring ranch came with lumber. And through all of it, Elias and Nora worked together so naturally, so easily, that more than one person exchanged a glance and said nothing. Daniel stayed close during those days. He helped where a 4-year-old could help, which mostly meant handing things to people and getting underfoot in a way that made everyone softer. He had started calling her Nora without the careful distance he'd had at first, and one morning he slipped his small hand into hers as they stood watching his father work, just reached over and took it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and Nora had to look away for a moment because her eyes had gone hot and she did not want him to see. That evening, after Daniel was in bed, Elias found her on the porch. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and she could feel him working up to something. She had gotten good at reading his silences by then. "I need to tell you something," he said. She turned from the railing to look at him. He came and stood beside her, both of them looking out at the dark valley, the mountains just shadows against a sky full of stars. "When I put that advertisement in the paper," he said, "my brother thought I was a fool. He said no decent woman would come all the way out here to marry a stranger with a sad boy and a half-broken ranch." He paused. "He wasn't entirely wrong about the ranch." Nora waited. "But he was wrong about the rest of it," Elias continued, his voice lower now. "Because you came, and you didn't run when it was hard. And you sat in the dirt next to me after the fire, and you said we like it was already true." He stopped and took a slow breath. "I don't know how to say things the right way. I never have. But I know that this has started to feel like something real. And I was not expecting that." Nora was quiet for a moment. "I was not expecting it either," she said. "I came here because I had no other door. I stayed because this started to feel like the first real home I've ever had." She looked at him then, and he was already looking at her. "I don't need things said the right way, Elias. I just need them to be true." He reached over and covered her hand with his where it rested on the railing. He did not say anything more. He did not have to. The wedding was small. Just Bess, the 2 brothers from the neighboring ranch, and the reverend from town. Daniel stood between Elias and Nora during the ceremony in his best shirt, very serious and very important looking, holding the ring that Elias passed to him to hold at just the right moment. When it was over and the reverend said Elias could kiss his bride, Elias leaned over and pressed his lips to her forehead first, briefly and gently, like a promise. Then he kissed her properly, and Bess made a sound of satisfaction from the back of the room. Daniel tugged on Nora's sleeve. She looked down at him. He was thinking about something, his brow furrowed in the way he had that looked exactly like his father. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked softly. He looked up at her with those brown eyes, so serious, so careful, and then he said in a very small voice, "Can I call you Mama now?" The room went completely still. Nora felt something inside her chest open up like a window thrown wide after years of being shut. She crouched down to his level and took both his small hands in hers, and she did not trust her voice for a moment. "Yes," she said at last, barely above a whisper. "You can call me that." He nodded once, very solemnly, and then he stepped forward and pressed himself against her in a hug that was all 4-year-old fierceness, small arms, and big feeling. She held him tight and looked up over his head at Elias, who was standing very still with his jaw tight and his eyes bright, and she thought that there were some moments in life that you could not prepare for no matter how long you had waited for them. This was one of them. In the months that followed, Croft's Hollow became the kind of place it was always meant to be. The east stall of the barn was rebuilt, stronger than it had been before. The ranch began to find its footing again. Daniel grew an inch and decided he wanted to learn to ride, and his father spent patient evenings teaching him in the soft light before supper. Nora started a small kitchen garden at the side of the house, and Bess declared the tomatoes the best in the county, which may or may not have been entirely true but was very satisfying to hear. Elias did not become a man of many words. That was never going to be who he was, but he became a man who reached for her hand in the evenings, who noticed when she was tired before she said so, who left wildflowers from the lower field on the kitchen table sometimes with no note because he did not think a note was necessary, and Nora loved him for exactly who he was, the quietness and the steadiness and the slow, sure warmth that had always been there, buried under the grief, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. One evening in early autumn, when the sky had gone gold and the air had that clean, sharp smell that meant the season was turning, the three of them sat on the porch after supper. Daniel was asleep against Nora's side, his dark head heavy and warm, the way children sleep when they are completely safe. Elias looked at them both for a long moment. "I used to think this place was just something to keep running," he said quietly. "Something to hold together until, I don't know, until something." "And now?" Nora asked. He was quiet for a moment, the way he always was when something mattered. "Now it feels like it's mine again," he said. "Like it means something." He looked at her. "You did that." Nora shifted Daniel gently and looked back at Elias across the top of his son's sleeping head. "We did that," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and the corner of his mouth turned up in the slow, rare way it had that still made something catch in her chest. "We," he said softly, like he would never get tired of the sound of it. And that night, sitting on the porch of a ranch that had become her home, with a sleeping child pressed warm against her side and a quiet man beside her who had shown her that love does not always arrive loud, Nora Calloway, now Nora Croft, understood something she had been waiting her whole life to understand. She had come to marry a stranger. She had been afraid and uncertain and braver than she had ever given herself credit for. And what she had found was not just a husband and not just a home. What she had found was herself, finally, in a place where she was wanted, not despite who she was, but because of it. Sometimes the door that opens at the end of everything is the one that was always meant for you. And if this story touched something in you today, if it made you feel warm somewhere you'd been feeling a little cold, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me what part stayed with you the most. Tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight, because these stories travel to the most beautiful places. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do that now. New Western romance stories go up every week, and every single one is written for people who believe that the quietest love is the kind that lasts. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next story.